Hello, everybody, and welcome to Do Your Research. I'm Michael,
And I'm Carl.
and this is a podcast. That's my introduction.
Perfect. That was perfect.
Thank you. No, this is a podcast. Do Your Research is the name that we've come up with for this, and this is a podcast where we are going to take people's advice for once. Folks on the internet yelling at us and tell us to do our research, we're going to go ahead and go do that and let you know what we come up with and share it with each other. That's the gist of our little podcast here.
Perfect.
Perfect.
Yep, yep. Well summarized.
Yeah, I thought so. Thank you. It's very tight, obviously, very professional right out the gate.
Yes, yes. We're setting an excellent precedent
Yeah,
that we will surely continue to meet.
100%. No, but so Carl, you know how last week, like last week exactly, we had a kind of interesting event happen.
Yeah, they announced the MVP and stuff awards for baseball for the year last
Something
Tuesday. I think the Golden Gloves and whatnot.
I think no, a little bit different than that. It was a
Huh.
little bigger.
A little bigger. Did they start releasing movies again?
No, nope. We are still not allowed to go into theaters and sit within 6 feet of anyone.
That reminds me, there was an election.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
An election where we officially and democratically, by both the popular and electoral college vote, voted out a fascist.
Yeah, or at minimum a severe right wing authoritarian.
That, you know what? I'm happy to use your description instead. That one's a little bit better for me.
Eh, we can talk later about how fascistic this particular right wing authoritarian is, but yes,
I have a feeling that will come up in this. But
yeah, yeah.
so the American people spoke 1 week ago tonight and said, "See you later, done. You're fired. Get out of here, buddy." Unfortunately, he will not be getting out until January when we have the official transfer of power. But in the meantime, I think he is going to do everything possible to make our lives and or President-elect Joe Biden's lives as miserable as physically possible.
Seems like the tactic so far.
Very similar to what he's been doing for, oh, say, the last 4 years.
True, entirely predictable in that sense.
So, in this last week, Mr. Trump, I don't want to call him president because it just feels weird coming out of my mouth, has really, even before the election, been just trying to sow doubt in the election results, the integrity of the election, questioning whether or not, well, not questioning whether or not, he's actually saying that there was millions of illegal votes that threw the election in Joe Biden's favor, uh, and those illegal votes should not be counted. Now, to this day, he has not provided any evidence whatsoever to prove or disprove or even back up the claims that he's making. But that's again not a that's not a new thing for this guy.
No, not in any way, shape, or form. It's remarkably similar for many reasons to his 2016 strategy.
Very similar to his 26 strategy. In fact, Stop the Steal, this movement that's now come up around the election, is literally the exact same naming that they used for the original 2012 Stop the Steal campaign when they thought that Hillary Clinton was going to beat Donald Trump, as did literally everyone else.
You saying that these authoritarians might not be clever.
Maybe just not original. I mean, to be fair, they didn't really get to use it last time very much, so I guess they're getting
That's
some
true.
mileage
I
out of
mean,
it
it,
now.
it reminds me of a lot from like the late 30s, early 40s.
Yeah. 830s, 40s, in maybe another country over in Europe, say?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. One shaped like a boot.
similar parallels. So you might be surprised, Carl, to find out that Mr. Trump has not always held this opinion about voting. His views seem to have kind of shifted back and forth somewhat over time. Uh,
Donald Trump flip flopped on something?
I know, right? Amazing from a man who has such conviction and standards.
He
Um,
does say he's the same person he was in first grade.
at least he's consistent. You got to give him that. Uh, so on September 28th, 2012, at 2:37 p.m., Donald Trump tweeted out with his tiny orange thumbs, "If you live in a state with early voting, you should be voting as soon as possible. Bring your friends and family with you."
All right,
Does
all
that
right,
sound
yeah.
like the Donald Trump that we know?
Actually, yes. I think just recently at rallies, he has frequently, in red states, encouraged his current followers to vote by mail and vote early and even vote twice.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that a little bit. That was another interesting development. So Donald Trump hasn't always been this way. It just seems that he's only been this way, perhaps when elections maybe aren't going the way that he would like. Just couple days later, well, a month and a couple days later, on November 6th, Trump tweeted out, and this would have been after the 2012 election, which, as you know,
Mm-hmm.
was Obama versus Mitt Romney.
And it was during the first term was when the press dinner where Obama talked about Donald Trump occurred, wasn't it? Wasn't that during the first term?
I believe that was during his second term, but I don't.
Was during the
Yeah,
second term,
don't quote me on
but
that.
it still would have been post birtherism
It was definitely post-birtherism.
or post beginning of birtherism. Yeah.
Absolutely. November 6, 2012, Trump tweeted out, "More reports of voting machines switching Romney votes to Obama. Pay close attention to the machines. Don't let your vote be stolen." And this was back when Twitter only let you use 150 characters, so his tweets were much more succinct back then.
Ah,
Um, and you can see him start devolving a little bit more as the election is not going quite the way that he wanted it to. November 7th, his tweet, "The voting booth process was a total disaster. It could and should be much better and more efficient. Tremendous room for error!" Exclamation point. I have to say, what I like about these tweets from him is they're like cogent sentences. Like they're short, they're succinct, but it's clear what he's talking about. Um, I would say some tweets that he's had, certainly in the last 4 years, have been much more difficult to decipher, much more meandering.
I believe. Okay, my. All right, I don't want to diverge too much, but I would. My hypothesis there would be that has more to do with the increased character length, allowing his tweets to more closely mirror his speech pattern, because his speech pattern is actually pretty consistent, at least going back a few decades.
Yes, it does seem that there has been something, happening there. I don't know. Even hearing him talk back then, he didn't talk the way he does now. Um, Not quite so meandering with his sentences, but um, so November 3rd, 2020, election day, Donald Trump tweeted out, "Vote, vote, vote," all in caps and exclamation points. Uh, November 3rd in the evening, "We are looking really good all over the country. Thank you," again in all caps.
This is
Um,
2016.
this is 2020.
This is
This is
2020.
just
Sorry,
last
yeah,
just last
2020.
week.
I thought, yeah.
Um, there we go. And he says, "We are up big, but they are trying to steal the election. We will never let them do it. Votes cannot be cast after the polls are closed." So
Correct.
this is true. Uh, as long as they are postmarked by election day, they can still be accepted in some states, though.
Yeah, yeah. They just
Um,
can't be cast.
they just can't be cast. So
They can
November
still
4th,
be counted.
they can still be counted. November 4th, he starts going downhill. All caps. "What is this all about?" And then a few hours later, "We have claimed, for electoral vote purposes, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, which won't allow legal observers, the state of Georgia, and the state of North Carolina, each one of which has a big Trump lead. Additionally, we hereby claim the state of Michigan, if, in fact, there was a large number of secretly dumped ballots, as has been widely reported."
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I shouldn't laugh. It's. I mean, I've never heard he's just the personification of so many memes, and I couldn't help but see the Michael Scott declaring bankruptcy meme
I
when
declare
he's calling
bankruptcy.
these states. Yeah, I declare Pennsylvania.
Yes, we are also claiming the state of Michigan. It's like, just man. And for those of you who don't know, or at least if you're listening to this very far in the future, Trump was never ahead during this election. AP had him trailing behind in all the states counted for the electoral vote. Um, there was a few states as the night wore on, night and then a couple days afterwards, while they were still counting ballots, that his lead in some states started disappearing in favor of Joe Biden. And
Though
so,
I would like to make one pedantic and semantic statement,
please.
which is that you noted that his the amount of votes that he seemed to be ahead by decreased as more votes were counted.
Correct.
Because we've heard a lot of terms like he was in the lead and he lost the lead, but because we're talking about counted votes, he never had the lead because
Ah,
this isn't a soccer match. He didn't score more goals and then Biden scored goals. All of these things were just being counted and had already occurred, and in many cases, the earlier votes were being counted last. So, in fact, if anything, we're moving backwards in time as more votes are being counted.
uh, that is a
So,
very
sorry,
good
but
point. No, no,
uh,
that's a very good point. You're right, and that's one of the things that actually I hated a lot about this election is the way that we were looking at live ballot counting essentially, and it's like, oh, who's
yeah,
ahead, who's behind, and you could see it in real time as these precincts were reporting in, and it would go up and down, and the lead would widen and shrink, and it was like it, it made it into a spectator sport almost, and
yes,
that is not the way that we should do this.
no, and it being extended out of multiple days, and when in fact it made it worse, but it was more true this election than any election in the entire hit. Well, I don't know the percentage of mail-in votes
Yeah.
pre like mass communication networks, but I'll go with in any modern election, it was at least more true that more votes had already been cast by election day than ever before in our history, certainly in gross number. I would
Absolutely.
think by percentage. And so it is more true than ever before that it was already decided before we found out what had happened.
Exactly. Um, yeah, and again, this too is remarkably one of the elections I think in yours and my voting lifetime, the time we've been eligible to vote, that hasn't been called on election night. With
I It's certainly only the second one I remember that wasn't called election night, and it's definitely the only one that hasn't been called on election night in my since I've been eligible to vote.
Yes, I remember being very dismayed about a year and a week ago. Uh, no, sorry, 4 years and a week ago. God, it feels like an eternity. Um, when I found out that we would have a uh, reality TV show host as a president,
Yeah,
and that's worked out.
about as well as you'd think.
Yeah, right. Well, so I guess to get to this point, election fraud, right? Donald
Yeah,
Trump has been trumpeting this horn, and he has been trumpeting it for long since before the election started. Even going so far as to tell some of his voters at a rally in South Carolina that uh,
hey,
they should, turn in the mail-in vote and then go and cast their vote in person because the mail-in voting was going to be so rife with fraud.
I
Um,
thought that was in
was that North
like
Carolina?
North Carolina or West Virginia. I don't believe that was in South Carolina. That's not important though. Doesn't change the meaning of the story.
It doesn't
It
change the
was
meaning of
in
the
a
story.
state where it definitely wasn't legal.
But if I'm saying I'm doing my research, I probably should have done that research and had that in front of me.
uh,
Doesn't change the fact that he said it. I could be wrong about how
no,
he said it too. Um, but that being the case, it does not change the fact that he has been very, very
North
vocal.
Carolina.
North Carolina. I knew it was one of those places.
They're different. The one to the north of us is better.
Yes, well, one to the north of you. You're over in the Bible Belt, and I'm over
Yeah.
in an anarchist jurisdiction on the West Coast, actively anarching.
Yes.
Yay! So, November 7th is the last quote that this is the last day that I pulled Trump tweets from. Uh, but it was I won this election by a lot. All exclamation. This is all caps. These are unhinged all caps tweets. Um, and then the observers were not allowed into the counting rooms. I won the election. I got
Yes, they were.
71 million legal votes. Bad things happened when our observers were not allowed to see. Never happened before. Millions of mail in ballots were sent to people who never asked for them. So you can see he's kind of just throwing, voter fraud spaghetti at the wall to see
Yeah,
what.
that's some high. Given the character limit, that's actually sort of an impressive amount of Gishgalop.
Yes, yeah, it is. I mean, all coherent sentences, which I appreciate, and all in caps, so they look even more deranged when you're reading them. Um, but these allegations of voter
Coherent is
fraud,
doing a lot of work in that sense, but okay. Yeah.
yeah, the allegations of voter fraud like this are not new. In fact, we've kind of been seeing a lot of this as more of a right wing talking point since the 2000 election, which was a contested election by Bush and Gore. And I want to read to you a little bit of a story that was going on here, an article from the New York Times that talks a little bit about what was going on at in after the election in 2000. In Palm Beach County, the vote recount crawled on with a gain of 12 votes for Governor George W. Bush. Mr. Gore had hoped to pick up a significant number of votes in this Democratic stronghold. So if you don't know, this vote came down to Florida. Florida was pretty split, razor thin margins. They had recount after recount, and so this was during that recount process um, when they were trying to figure out who had the most votes in Florida and thus who would be the president. In Broward County, where Mr. Gore has picked up 79 votes, the recount proceeded more or less smoothly, despite one Republican observer's charge of what people here are calling Chad eating. If you don't remember Chads were the ballots in Florida had like a punch card kind of system. It wasn't electronic, or maybe they were
Chad.
partially electronic, but they also had these little like Chad things where they would have the name of whoever you wanted to vote for, and you would have to punch out the Chad next to that name, and they would run these things through an automatic scanning system, and then that would tally up the votes.
Like a
Uh,
Scantron if you punched holes instead of filling out bubbles.
exactly. Do they still have Scantrons? Is that still a thing?
I don't know, we're old. I
We
don't
are
know.
old. We have no kids too, so. But anyway, um, so we have these little chads, right? And they're charging people over what is called Chad eating. So George St. Lemieux, vice chairman of Broward County Republican Party, charged on Friday that a Republican observer saw a Democratic observer, quote, putting chads in his mouth. Republicans in Broward and Palm Beach counties are pointing to the number of chads, the tiny scraps of paper from the holes in a punch card ballot, left on the counting room floor as proof that the ballots are being roughly handled
But
or perhaps even punched out on purpose.
but when
Mr. Lemieux said that he had heard rumors that Democrats were telling counters to conceal the chads, and that was why the Democratic observer was eating them.
but but they'd just be like in the envelope or fall out or like that's also just completely and utterly unverifiable nonsense.
Right. But they're claiming it,
What is
so
the like? What evidence could they possibly have?
well,
All right, sorry.
I'll tell you, Carl.
Okay,
So
eating chads. Okay, because there's less
Republicans,
of them on the ground than they think there should be, or were there more of them on the ground than they thought there should be?
you're getting very close there. So Republicans were counting the Chads in Broward County. On Wednesday, they found 78 in the counting room. On Thursday, they found 270, and on Friday, they found 142.
Okay.
So Mr. Lemieux says,
I guess he was hungrier on the day they only found 42.
I get, yeah, maybe
72.
they didn't have lunch on Thursday or something.
Yeah.
They didn't bring in
Yeah.
lunch for people. I mean,
Uh,
this is
he
uh,
forgot to bring his starch.
yeah, right. It's just some paper will work. Um, uh, it's just it seems so silly.
How do you
We
know how many Chads there'd be supposed to be though? Because like they'd already be punched out. That's how you count the ballot.
Mm-hmm.
But some more of them would fall out. I mean, that was the problem with the ballot itself.
Right.
But like,
It was a
how,
very poor design for
how
the
do you
ballot.
know how many there are supposed to be? How do you even know if there's less than there should be or more than there should be? And why the fuck is your first assumption that someone's eating them? Why would you eat them? Why not just put them in your pocket
Carl,
or throw them out?
there's less on the floor than they thought there would be.
How many did they? Why did they think there would be more? How do you possibly come up with some kind of objective measure for average number of chads that should fall out per ballot? How do you know? Like, even if that were a good, okay, yeah, no,
Yeah,
that's stupid.
it's
Even if it were a good measure, you'd have to determine so many things. You'd have to know, like, on average, how many chads fall out of a counted ballot. You would have to have a rule that the chads have to be brushed off your shirt onto the floor, that no one would sweep up during the day, that no one would try to pick anything up, and then gather them up. It's ridiculous.
it does seem a little bit far fetched.
And this was propagated by the chair of the Republican Party for the county.
In that county in Florida, that's correct.
What county? Broward?
This is Broward County, correct? Yeah. I know you're typing it up. I can hear you.
I'm finding out the population of Broward County in
It's
2000.
it's a lot. It was a big county.
1.63 million. That
Yes.
should not, in Florida, that
In
should not
Florida.
have been a small Republican organization. And this buffoon, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Do go on.
He.
Do go
I
on.
think he perhaps had an agenda, Carl.
Whoa, yeah, maybe.
Uh, so he says we walk around and we find them on the floors, the chairs, the tables.
Yeah, because
And that
okay.
has Republicans charging that the handling of the ballots actually alters the way the ballots are counted.
Yeah, okay.
And I'll tell you what, Carl, the alleged Chad eater, as of this afternoon, not this afternoon, but in 2000 when this was written, has
Oh,
not
this
been.
is still his quote.
This is still. Oh, yes. The alleged Chad eater has not been identified by Republicans. You'll you'll like this one. Leonard K. Samuels, a lawyer for the Democratic Party, was asked to respond to the allegations, and he said,
Why?
I
Why?
he said, I can't even respond to that.
Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, no. And screw the person who asked him to, because that's stupid. That's just stupid.
It's it's pretty wild what ended up happening in this election, but you can tell even back then. I mean, it was a
Yeah,
tense scene.
I mean, yeah, it's a lot of the same garbage.
It's a lot of the same and a very similar allegations without any evidence, you know, purporting to have proof of something that actually isn't definitive proof of anything.
To be the people that are very, very loud about how much they care about election security, right? They're louder, even though they don't pass bills, but, that's a different matter for a different day. They sure are willing to throw a lot of obvious, like, garbage that doesn't make sense at the wall, which would absolutely obfuscate real problems with election security and ballot counting and things like that. Like, the one point he fit in there, that handling the ballots will alter the count with a system like punch out things, that's
Right.
a valid concern.
Yeah, it's a bad
Completely
design.
buried in 17 layers of total bullshit so that everyone else has to refute all the absolute garbage before getting to the one point that might actually be salient about the fact that Florida got counted multiple times.
Exactly. Until the Supreme Court told them to stop, and then
While uh, the person who wasn't winning at first and who lost the popular vote was winning.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And there we have our history. There we have the last 20 years that have all
I would
kind of
also
flowed
like
through
to
this
note that there were multiple recounts in Florida, and I had forgotten how narrow those margins were. You touched on it a little bit when you were talking about how they were talking about 70 votes here and 50 votes there.
Yeah.
But we were talking about a 500 vote gap in Florida in 2000, which is
Very small.
20 times smaller than the smallest gap in any state that's possibly contested in 2020.
We'll have to get to that. Our friend Tucker Carlson may have had something to say on that note today.
Oh, goody.
Yay. Might not be what you think though.
Oh,
Um,
I did read about that. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. It
Um,
reminded me a lot of when he discovered the evidence that had been lost in the mail but didn't want to share it because he said it was time to leave that person alone.
oh yeah. Whatever happened? Did he just say it's time to leave him alone and leave it at that?
Yeah, and never showed the evidence that he supposedly had that was lost in the mail, but now he'd found.
Well, I mean, the post office has really been under stress these past few weeks. So
Man,
yeah. Um, so Carl, I hate to tell you this, but there really is not a lot of evidence at all to support the allegations that widespread voter fraud exists. I know that must come as a shock to you.
yeah,
I can hear in your derisive laughter the
yeah.
shock and
Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
horror.
What? But they talk about it all the time.
Yeah, I know. With how
Is
much
that
they talk
because of
about it,
voter ID laws?
that plays a part of it. But
Hey,
it's a lot of
you know,
things.
you can't have voter fraud if you don't let people vote.
That it is hard for them to commit fraud when they are unable to vote. Voter disenfranchisement is a very big problem. Um, and
Solution to voter fraud, Michael.
mhm.
Solution.
Make it so people can't vote.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. If we restrict it to just enough people, then we'll limit our chances that there'll be any fraud.
Exactly.
Exactly. Well, I will tell you this, Carl. Vote fraud in the United States is exceedingly rare.
Yeah,
With mailed ballots or and otherwise. And as you know, this year we had a huge increase in mailed-in ballots because of this fun little pandemic that we've also been going
yeah,
through, um, COVID-19, that really hit us hard here starting in March, and has made it so that we couldn't really have a summer and do anything fun, to stay home and wear masks and wash our hands all the time, which is not a
yeah.
bad thing, but um, not being able to go outside was kind of sucked.
It's been a bummer.
I don't know
Yeah.
if you have any hot takes on that.
It sucks to be under a pandemic that the government is refusing to manage.
Oh, yeah, that's a story for another time too.
Yeah.
But over the
Pandemics
past,
suck.
yes,
Carl's Hot Takes 2020.
pandemics suck. um, Carl, over the past 20 years, about 250 million votes have been cast by mail ballot nationally. And our good friends over at the Heritage Foundation, the wonderful right wing think tank that brought us so many great Supreme Court nominees this year.
You're
Uh,
thinking of the Federalist Society, actually,
I
for
thank
the
you,
Supreme Court nominees. However,
the
the
Federalist Society.
Heritage Foundation uh, is is a similar organization to the Federalist Society. So,
Similar in bent and fervor. This is good. This is why we both do our research so that you can correct me when I'm wrong. I think that's what's going to happen more often than not, as far as this goes. But you've always been the smart one.
the the nosy corrector.
No, I like it. I think that's needed in this podcast. So our friends over at the Heritage Foundation maintain an online database of election fraud cases in the United States. Uh, and their reports that there have been just over, I think it's 1,700 cases now of vote fraud in all forms, resulting in about 1,200 criminal convictions over the past 20 years. So since about the year
That's
2000.
1,200 convictions since the year 2000. How many mail-in votes did you say had been cast since the year?
There was about 250 million votes cast by mail nationally in those 20
The
years.
1,200 prosecuted fraud cases, are those all mail-in fraud? Or is that
Uh,
all voter fraud, all election fraud?
that is all election fraud.
Okay. Is it just in federal elections?
Uh, no, as it turns out.
That's 1,200 just state level? So that's local, state, and federal.
Local, state, and federal.
Out of
Yes,
all votes cast, there were 1,700 noted instances of fraud, of which 1,200 were prosecuted.
that is correct.
Do you know how many votes have been cast since the year 2000?
I know it's a lot more than 250 million because that's just the mail-in ballots. But I did do some
Uh,
math on this, so I
oof.
can tell you a little bit more about what this was.
Yeah, shoot
Um,
me out your estimate. I was trying to figure out a percentage in my head, but I think it's too small.
yeah, let's go ahead. Let's put it in perspective.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think it is important to notice that if we're talking about absentee ballot fraud, and that is vote by mail fraud, there are only 204 cases involving a fraudulent use of absentee ballots, and only 143 of those resulting in criminal convictions. I actually think it's up to about 145 now. There's two more that I might go in to talk to a little bit about in detail.
Are those 2020 instances?
2020 instances, yep.
Your 250 million mail in ballots wouldn't include 2020 yet, though, would
It
it?
does not actually. So that
So
number
then you
is
don't
going to
need
be
to
quite
include
higher.
those.
Oh yes, it's
Yeah,
going to be.
so
We probably did more than that this year alone.
143 instances of prosecuted fraud for mail-in ballots out of 250 million cast.
And cast, yep, and that's before this year. So if we look at, let's say 143 cases of absentee ballot fraud using mailed ballots over the course of 20 years comes out to roughly 7 or 8 cases a year nationally. 7 or 8 cases, right?
uh, Also, may I point 0.0000 572
Yes. Or rounded
percent,
up, yes. That is very
or
true.
rounded up 0.
Uh, yes, that is an extremely small number. Um, that's 0.0000057% of total votes cast. Extremely small number.
Yeah, to put it in perspective really quickly, the average income in the United States in 2019 was 68,703.
Okay.
So that would be the equivalent for someone who made $68,703 in 2019. $3.93.
Oof. That is not a lot of money, and also not a lot of votes. Not a lot of
No,
fraud.
no, that's
Really,
essentially zero.
really not. And I have to remind you that this data comes from the Heritage Foundation, whose conservative bent is so far that if they had the data to support this, it would be plastered all over the front page of the website. Um,
Actually, they do specifically try to use this data to support voter ID measures.
they do, because
Um,
they look at any zero. I guess what would you call that? That's a zero tolerance for any fraud, right? We have to have zero fraud, or else it might swing an election if we have 3 votes in a state in an election year that are fraudulent.
they just generally work against any expansion of voting rights in general.
Right, and there's a good
The
reason for that. I mean, it's not a good reason, but a logical reason for them, and that is the more people vote, the more people tend to vote Democratic.
Yeah, yeah.
It's almost like their ideas are not that popular outside of their base, which is
Well,
sizable this
yeah.
year, unfortunately.
Which is also why a large amount of their um, documented effort goes to convincing people not to vote because, say, both sides are the same or other sorts of similar things. But that's a tangent for another time.
Both sides are the same. Yeah, that's gonna be something we're gonna have to do our research on here too at some point, Carl.
Do we? I mean,
Yeah,
really? Because they're just not.
I mean, we should,
We should do research on the origins of the talking point, perhaps. But I
perhaps.
don't think it is possible to research that claim because they're just not.
You mean we wouldn't be able to find any evidence to the contrary or
You
to
can't
support
prove a
it?
negative,
That's true.
and they're not. So, I mean, well, yeah, they'd have to prove a positive. I'm not interested in engaging in disproving the idea that both sides are the same because they're not.
Well, we'll have to have a show notes discussion then offline and figure.
Okay, yeah.
Um, so, Carl, Oregon, the state that I live in,
Yes.
and the state that we grew up very near to when we were growing
Yes.
up together. Um, Oregon started doing mail-in ballots to all voters in the year 2000. So for
Yes.
this is the 20th year that Oregon has been doing almost exclusively vote by mail.
Yes.
Um, and the state has worked diligently to put in place stringent security measures as well as strict punishments for those who would tamper with the mailed ballot. Um, and the numbers are really interesting when you look at Oregon. And I want to say that I have my whole life always voted by mail. Every election that I have been eligible to vote in, I have always voted by mail because both in Washington and in Oregon, mail-in ballots are a standard. They're mailed to everyone, and that's how we vote. And instead of having to go on election day, take time off work, go stand in line for sometimes hours, depending on where you live, to go, stand at a machine and punch numbers in and get out of there as quick as you can, go find a bathroom after you've been standing in line for hours. It's miserable. And in a pandemic, it's irresponsible. Um, so we did mail-in ballots this year, and everybody else in the country, in most states, got to experience the fun of getting mailed a voter's pamphlet, having your ballot with you, and being able to, do like my tradition, where I like to, you know, uh, sit down with my partner and read through um, read through all the candidates, look at all the positions, read what they say, read the endorsements, really take a good hard look at them and their positions and stances and their appeal to get our votes, and then, you know, cast our votes, with a nice cup of coffee sitting outside, and then once that's all done, packing them up, putting them in their little envelope, and then walking them down to our little small town local library, dropping it off in the ballot drop. It is a very pleasant way to engage in the civic process.
Yeah.
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 What was
Yeah.
it like? What was it like over there for you, voting? Because you are not in Oregon.
No, nor have I ever voted in Oregon. Or Washington, actually.
There you go.
Yeah, because I registered at school when I was at school in the Midwest. And so I have always stood in line. But I have also lived in a lot of rural areas. So, like, the town my school was in was very small. There was a polling, the campus had a polling place. So,
So it wasn't so bad. You could go
yeah, it
there
just
and
worked fine. I walked in, I voted, and I left. And then where I live now, in South Carolina, I they did allow early voting this year because of the pandemic. Although they did not allow the pandemic was not an excuse to get an absentee ballot
no,
in South Carolina.
of course not.
Um, and with the exception of my first year here, voting takes uh, between 15 minutes and an hour. This year it took an hour. I did vote early. Um,
Now, does that
when
hour include you standing in line, or is that an hour at the booth?
no, that's the time standing in line.
Okay,
The booth is pretty quick. Um, I do my research on my own beforehand. We do not get a pamphlet. We do not get any information from the state
really,
whatsoever about what's going to be on the ballot.
really.
There was a funding measure on the ballot for my municipality this year. Um, and while I was standing in line, I was handed a pamphlet listing what it would fund. But other than that, we get nothing. And you are barred from using digital devices inside the polling place. So you also can't really do a lot of research when you're there, so you need to do it beforehand.
Boy,
And then our ballots are on machines. They are not paper ballots, but they do have a receipt. So, I mean, there's some level of tracking. I'm not aware of any major allegations of ballot fraud on the part of the machines where I live.
probably because your state is not really contested at all.
Nope. Um, And yeah, then you go through the measures. One thing of note that hugely benefits well, Republican candidates in South Carolina, down ballot Republicans, particularly when there is some really loud, boisterous, popular Republican on the ticket, is that the South Carolina ballots do have we do have straight ticket voting. So the first screen that pops up when you go to vote is you can choose a party
What?
and then just leave.
What?
Yeah, it skips everything else. Well, maybe not like the local funding measure. Um, and if a candidate is running as an independent, they cannot get that. And um, but the
Wow.
parties that are running do show up there as a straight ticket option. Um, I don't know what happens when you click that if like there's an office with no one from that party in it. If you then get the option, because I refuse to click that option. Um,
Yeah, it doesn't seem very responsible.
but like I think when we see how much Lindsey Graham outperformed his own polling, but performed much more consistently with Donald Trump's polling, if we do find out what happened there, I personally suspect that that will be a Trump bump for Mr. Graham
That probably will be.
because he ended up performing much more closely to Donald Trump's polling margin in the state.
That is crazy. That
Yeah,
is wow. How lazy is that?
it's awful, and of course people are going to do it if it's there. It's just like recycling, right?
Of course.
You
Yeah,
can
yeah.
only depend on people to recycle if it's easy. If it's easy, a bunch of people will do it.
Right. If all I had to do as a Republican who didn't really care too much, or a Democrat, I don't want to be too biased, but like who just said, I only care about the number or the letter next to their name. I don't care anything about their politics or any of their positions on policy. Uh, it's just that letter that matters.
Or like if a presidential candidate got me really fired up. Like if
Yeah.
I'm really, really just rip roaring for Michael Dukakis, I
Yeah.
might
He just
just
he looked so good in that tank.
straight damn.
Well, I have to say, I am a little shocked to learn all of that. And I think I can say definitively that the way we do voting over here, uh, much better.
Yep,
Yeah,
yep, yep. Not gonna argue.
man. This, uh, well, mail in ballots for the win. I can only hope that with so many people getting a taste of how convenient that is to be able to vote from home, in the comfort of your own home at your own dining room table, drinking your own coffee, filling it out in the morning, Irishing up your coffee if you want. Hell, it's your own house. Do
Yeah.
what you want. There are no laws against voting while drinking whiskey. I wouldn't have voted for the last 12 years. um, so, getting back to our numbers on here. So, we talked about Oregon, and we talked about we've been doing this mail-in voting for 20 years now,
Yep.
and everything that we've got in place for that. Um, so for our
Also known as 1/7 the number of mail-in fraud. You've been doing it. The number of years you've been doing it is 1/7 the number of total mail-in vote fraud cases for the entire country in the same amount of time.
that's a good number to quote. I like that. Um, so as at the point now, this obviously doesn't count for this election. It's a lot more than that now, but we have had well over 50 million ballots cast over the past
Okay.
20 years, not including this election. And there have only been two fraud cases verifiable enough to result in convictions for mail ballot fraud. Just two.
Two.
Only two.
2 out of 50 million. I mean that I'm not even gonna bother. That's effectively zero.
It's effectively zero. It's 0.0000004%.
So 1/100th of what there is
One
for the
hundred
entire
thousandth? Yeah.
country. 100,000th of what
Mm-hmm.
there is for the entire country.
Yeah.
So more mail-in ballots and an even smaller proportion of mail-in voter fraud.
Mm-hmm.
Almost like the prevalence of the technique leads to better safeguards.
Exactly.
Although honestly, we're so close to zero in both. There's no point in making any sort of percentage analysis on either of those numbers.
Yeah, it's true.
It's just zero.
a percentage that might put that into a little more perspective, that 0.00004%, that's about 5 times less likely than getting hit by lightning.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, anyway, voter fraud. And again, I want to stress that this is coming from a database that is kept by the Heritage Foundation. Um, So I appreciate them, putting this out here. This is very interesting to look into this and look into all these cases. But the more and more you start diving into this, it really strains the credulity of the argument that there is widespread voter fraud going on. These two cases that were strong enough to get convictions were honestly, I would say a reasonable person could say that these were accidents, that these people did not intend to circumvent the law. And I would also say, too, that judging by the counties in which they voted, um, they were very rural Oregon counties. It was unlikely that it was a concerted Democratic effort to try and disenfranchise Republican voters. Um, Very unlikely. I don't know how these people voted. I didn't look into it that far, but I didn't need to. The whole point was that one of these cases, it was a woman who was taking care of her ailing father, and she was up in Washington, just right across the river. And she had got a ballot up there in Washington, and then had another one waiting for her when she got home because she'd requested an absentee. So she had two ballots, and she turned both of them in. And she
Both for
signed.
Oregon, or one for Washington and one for Oregon?
It was one for Washington, one for Oregon. So she
So
must
I
have
would
been
just like to note there that that means even though the states have separate systems, she was still caught for voting in both states.
correct. Yep.
Like, so just as a additional point to show the security.
Yeah. Exactly. It was easy to catch, and in both cases, the people that had accidentally, one could argue accidentally, committed these felonies, uh, they did so, just unknowingly, or just casually. I mean, I imagine your father is dying, you've been dealing with that, and you can't remember that you voted up in Washington, and then you get home finally and you go and vote there. Doesn't seem like a kind of criminal mastermind kind of plan here. Um,
No, I mean, for many reasons. Like, okay, she's an adult. She did something illegal.
Mhm.
I'm not saying that to prosecute her on that was unjust. I do not know enough of the case law or what gets prosecuted right, so I'm totally cool with her accountability.
Right.
Uh, However, yeah, easily could see how like she made sure she voted, forgot she voted twice, accidentally voted twice. Even if she nefariously voted twice, she's one person and she proved the system works because she got caught.
Yeah. Exactly.
And yeah,
It's more of an indicator that, as you say, the system actually is working because we do catch these people.
and did it in Washington or Oregon, which we already clearly knew what the outcomes were going to be.
Right. Exactly. So I want to dive a little bit more, Carl. I think you on your side did a little bit of research about, um, not so much the history side of it, but what kind of allegations that are going and circling out there in the right wing right now.
Yeah, I did. I pulled these, I guess, 3 or 4 days ago now. So I haven't checked back in to see what new narratives have emerged. Um, I do want to touch on one thing though before going into some of these specific ones, which we sort of touched on with this last story,
Sure.
your story, which is that even if she was acting nefariously, we're talking about one person and one vote, which proved the system worked by catching her in one of the ways in which it would be hardest to be caught, i.e., voting in multiple states with systems that may not communicate. Um, and that is just the sheer numerical difficulty of stealing a United States presidential election. Um, Wherein, again, we mentioned this earlier, but one of the closest states we're talking about still has a margin of 10,000. Every ballot you falsify is a felony. Every single one is an instance of a felony. So you are talking about 10,000 felonies in Georgia if you believe the election was swung by fraud.
At a
And in many
minimum.
other states, we're talking tens or hundreds of thousands. Oh yes, and good point there, at a minimum, because you can't know what the vote's going to turn out like. So there would have been some padding in there, right?
One would hope
So
if you're going to commit a fraud on that scale that you
yeah,
would have accounted for that little contingency and those unknowns.
yeah, you're talking about hundreds of thousands or millions, realistically. Actually, not even realistically. It would require millions of instances of fraud in a single election to steal it,
Millions.
most of the time. Uh, and you would plan this in advance. You can't do it after the fact. Uh, and it would involve circumventing so many safeguards. Like, this woman was caught voting in two different states. There's signature checks, there's validity checks, there's making sure you didn't vote twice, there's provisional ballots. I mean, there's so much security that honestly, one of the only plausible ways to get away with voting twice would be to impersonate another voter. But to
Right.
do that, you'd need fake ID, false identification to register and get their address changed. You'd need to commit identity theft. You'd need to commit multiple frauds just to perpetrate the voter fraud for each vote, and somehow have to know that the person who you were impersonating wasn't going to vote. Um, it Stealing an election in this manner is just a logistical nightmare, such that if one could successfully run an organization which would require tens of thousands of participants and would have to still be kept secret, that like they wouldn't ever lose.
I
Even if they could, like, Hillary Clinton would have been president. Joe Biden wouldn't have lost seats in the House and the Senate. Like, it's
Yeah, that is a big important point to note with these allegations of voter fraud in the presidential election. You would think that you know you, whoever would be orchestrating a scam on this scale would have to know that getting the presidency isn't going to ensure that you can get your policy goals met,
no.
whatever nefarious policy goals they might be.
And even just the presidency, we're already talking about a perpetrating a fraud on the scale of literally tens of millions of felonies.
You would have to be a
Uh,
pretty competent secret society, deep
yeah,
state organization in order to be able to pull off something like that.
and even if you were talking, okay, this year historical mail-in, right? And so the specter of mail-in voting fraud, because supposedly there's less safeguards, even though there aren't less safeguards, and supposedly like somehow someone on the counting end could be involved. It's not impossible that someone on the counting end could be involved, but to steal that in a presidential election, you'd still be talking about literally thousands of people. There are
Thousands.
over 3,000 counties in the US. Each has multiple vote counting centers. You'd need people in a significant portion of them, and you'd need observers that are recruited differently to back that up. Like, the logistical nightmare of stealing an election through changing the votes alone renders it nearly impossible. Um,
It
but
sounds very difficult.
yeah, so then to sort of go into some of the more particular cases, um, but there's a study by Judicial Watch that had a lot of articles written about it that was getting bandied about. And it sort of touches, to go into this, it touches on some of the numerical arguments. The Judicial Watch study found, and this is the way it was presented in most of the articles, that in 353 counties had voter registration rates over 100%, and that there were 1.8 million more voters registered than the total eligible voters in these
Wait, so
counties.
they're saying there was almost 2 million more votes cast than there were registered voters in the county?
No, almost 2 million more registered voters in these 353 counties across 8 states than there were people eligible to be registered.
I see. So they're saying there's more registered voters than there are people eligible to vote. in
Yes.
those counties across those states.
So you have quickly hit on, well, Judicial Watch is the first problem.
Ah,
We can talk perhaps more about Judicial Watch at some point, but
it's a
they
biased news
are.
source, Carl.
What's that?
Is it a biased news source? Judicial Watch?
It's not so much a news source, it's more of a biased think tank like the Heritage Foundation. Um, Very on par with one another.
I see.
Uh,
A lot of
yeah,
those around.
yeah. So that's the first problem. The second problem is the one you hit on, which is that even if this were true, and even if this is true, and even if this were nefarious, I guess, you don't know that all of these, even if there's discrepancies in the rolls, it doesn't tell us if they voted, right? That's
Oh,
not a thing.
sure.
Knowing that there are more people registered to vote than should be does not tell you that they voted. And in fact, knowing our voter participation rates, they probably didn't,
It,
right?
I mean, it was better this year than it's been in
Ever,
ever,
but it was still
but
sucked. I mean, it was
still
still
not
under
great.
70, right?
Oh, yeah,
Like,
definitely.
so, and that doesn't even include the people that are eligible but unregistered. That's just unregistered. Okay, but so that alone is a problem to this as a gotcha, right? Is it's not a gotcha. Now, it is a legitimate issue, and it's good that people look at this because it takes a lot of labor to clear voter rolls of people who have moved,
Hmm.
inactive voters, and things like that. There's labor there, and it is important labor, and it should be done.
So it's like a
Um,
database that's maintained of all the registered voters that are in a
Yeah, but
particular
you know, in
county.
different states, there's different requirements for if these databases can talk to each other. Like, because of the privacy of voting, because of the privacy of medical records, when you die, they don't just tell the voting office that you're dead, right? Because
Yeah, yeah. It's
yeah,
you got other things to worry about when someone dies.
yeah. So I mean, but the government has back checks; these things have to be maintained. So it's not bad to look into. But that sort of brings us to the numerical issue, which is that 1.8 million, and the way it was presented, that showed up in the headline over and over again 1.8 million, 1.8 million. Um, and, like, as an individual, that's a big number. But when we're talking about the scale of a presidential election, especially when this is divided across 8 states, it is not actually that big a number.
Right. We
And I
had
know we were just talking about, like, Georgia swung by 10,000 votes, but this is across 8 states. Um, these 8 states in which these 353 counties are include Alaska, which, at least as of the when I checked a few hours ago, still was like a 2-to-1 ratio for Trump. Uh, Colorado, Maine, Michigan, Maryland, New Jersey, Rhode Island, and Vermont, of which the other 7 did go to Joe Biden. But even if we assume that this was nefarious and all 1.8 million of these were fraudulently registered for Joe Biden to vote for Joe Biden, right? Even if we live in that world, across those 8 states, and I'll just take Alaska out. So for some reason they included Alaska in the list, but there
hmm,
weren't any from there.
hmm.
Uh, the vote difference between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, as of when I did this research yesterday, was already at 2.26 million.
That
So the 1.8 million still isn't enough to swing the election, even if it were a problem. And that would be a problem, right?
sure. We've got more people on the voter rolls than we have eligible voters.
Which is a problem and should be fixed, but it's not
Sure.
necessarily nefarious. But even in this world where it's nefarious, the way it's being reported on, it's not enough to swing the election.
No, I can't imagine it would be. We,
No, not
yeah,
across those 7 states had a vote difference of 2.26 million as of yesterday, and it's probably gone up with how some of them were trending.
I see.
Um,
And Trump would have needed, more than just one of those states to win. Even if he got Pennsylvania, that still wouldn't have been enough.
that's also true. So yeah, it's not, and what like the range in Colorado, the gap's 400 was 420,000. Maine was 70. Michigan 146. Maryland 730. New Jersey 656,000. Rhode Island 103,000. Vermont 130,000. Total gap there, excluding Alaska, one of the states they listed, 1.8 million was 2.26 million, which again is way bigger than the 1.8 million difference in registered versus eligible.
That's crazy.
This also means that like the people smart enough to commit a conspiracy to register 1.8 million voters are too stupid to check the registration numbers in the county, which are publicly available, and what was used to do this study, to make sure they didn't register more people than existed. But that's
Well,
another
Carl,
portion of it.
you can't think of everything when you're trying to execute a scam on this scale. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not feasible to think of every
Um,
option.
The but then there's even more issues, which is that the data isn't really all that valid anyway. They use the same methodology they used to do a study in 2016 and 2018 of Pennsylvania. Uh, they admit in which didn't produce anything. We'll go into a little bit more of that later. Judicial Watch themselves acknowledge that the list may include inactive voters, people, which would be like people who aren't voting anymore. They might be dead, they might have moved, they're just not active. Judicial Watch didn't scrub the data before
Oh,
picking their denominator. Um,
so it included active and inactive voters that were still
yeah,
on the
and
rolls.
again, might these counties need to clean up uh, their
Databases,
registration?
yeah,
Sure,
yeah.
but also the I should have looked this up, but 1.8 million is not even a significant fraction of the population of those 8 states.
Oh,
One of
yeah,
them's New Jersey, and another's Colorado, and
yeah.
another's Michigan. I mean, there's like it's not that significant. It does not the existence of that gap. I'm not saying it doesn't the gap isn't there, but it does not in any way, shape, or form show any nefarious action. It shows that they weren't done cleaning up their voter rolls yet, and Judicial Watch has brought this case and done this study many times. They've didn't matter if it was LA or Pennsylvania, at least there was no fault found that they weren't keeping up with their voter rolls. There just were some people that hadn't been removed yet. Um,
So you're telling me no evidence for voter fraud there either?
yeah, the proportions don't work out. There's no evidence that it's nefarious. Even if it were nefarious, the numbers are not significant enough. And it would require these people capable of completing this vast, vast, vast fraud not to have checked some really basic information that you'd want to check if you were perpetrating that kind of a fraud,
So
right?
competent enough to execute a fraud, but not confident enough to actually look and see, oh, am I going to be able to get away with this
Here's
by
a
doing something
really
stupid?
obvious way I could get caught. Yeah.
Well,
Um,
according to President Trump, he's already caught them, in
yeah.
quotes.
So
Yeah.
like that was bandied about a lot. There were multiple articles written about this study, and it doesn't really mean what anyone is presenting it as meaning.
Mm.
Um,
Using it out of context as evidence for something that
yeah,
it
and of
doesn't
course
support.
manipulating this. Oh my God, 353 counties. That sounds like a lot.
Yeah,
1.8 million votes. That sounds like a ton.
that's
But
sneaky.
like 140 million people voted. I mean, that's just it. Yeah. So not that big a deal, right?
It's all lies, damn lies, and statistics, Carl.
And that brings us to a couple I wanted to focus on that are much more specific in their
Okay.
allegations. So the first is from an news outlet. I don't know. I don't
Wait,
really want to call it a
that's
news outlet.
okay. I was like, that's the name of it is news outlet.
It's a place called the American Thinker, and
Oh,
you and I have talked a little bit about this, but I had a very interesting experience diving into some of these websites, which is I don't know. I mean, this obviously going to show some of my bias, but like I
I
keep
think
up with some
we've
liberal
done a pretty good job
sources.
of showing our
Uh,
bias already, Carl.
But like, and I read Our Politics, right? But
Yeah.
like, there's some trash sources that get posted there. Like, The Independent is notably kind of garbage. They're
Mm.
factual. They're highly factual, but they're
Mm.
very biased. They are blatantly and clearly biased in word choice, presentation, and their graphics kind of suck. And
They
like,
got to punch up the marketing, punch up the
yeah,
digital
they're clearly
graphics.
just rushing to print for them clicks, right?
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
there's some other like so-sos like the Daily Beast and things like that. And I had always just assumed that the R conservative sources were similar.
Mm-hmm.
They're not.
Oh,
This one, at least, which when I counted, it was like there were several of the top posts on R conservative when I was finding these
this is
that
on
were
Reddit.
from this website. Yeah. Um, yes, on the Reddit conservative subreddit,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm not encouraging anyone to go to. Um,
No, not a lot
but
of good, happy, fun things happening
no,
there.
memes and bullshit.
Ah,
And the occasional Fox News article, so memes and bullshit.
so basically
Um,
4chan. Got it.
yeah. And this one though, the American Thinker is it's just amateurish. It looks like a list serve from the late '90s. I mean, and okay, the appearance alone should not dissuade one from finding accurate information, but the headlines, content, and sourcing, their people don't have bios on there, so I
Oh,
have no idea who the people writing for it are,
okay.
um, and so there's not like there's anonymity,
Mm-hmm.
and their articles are very very clearly biased. So as of November 9th at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the top article posted to American Thinker,
Okay.
and this was actually distinct. They have a blog section and an articles section, and this was an article.
Okay.
Um, was about how faithless electors could still elect Donald Trump. It was titled New Election Math. It's not 270, it's 26 to 24. Um, and
Huh.
yeah, it was about how it was the obligation of conservative Republican held state houses to reject the submitting electors by popular vote and instead override the popular vote and just send people who would vote for Donald Trump in the electoral college.
Yeah, that that sounds like that might be circumventing the will of the people, Carl.
That's pretty. I know I said right wing authoritarian. That's fashy.
Would I
That's
that seems to rise to the level of coup.
dictatorial. Yeah,
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 yeah.
it would be. It would be. Thankfully, no real Republicans are proposing it. Uh, they
Hmm.
are, though. Just to be
Hmm.
clear, that was facetious.
You got my hopes up there for a second.
Yeah. So that was their non one. Now, and this is super petty, but I would just like to note that even in this 9 word, including the numbers title, they couldn't even keep their metaphor straight
Oh,
because it's
Jesus.
not 270, it's 26 to 24. Should be at least, I mean, maybe they were going to say 253 to whatever at the time they wrote it. In terms of like the lowest called electoral math, but they gave a ratio of states, and then they gave the victory condition for electoral votes. So it should at least be it's not 270, it's 26, or it's not 270 to 268, it's 26, 24, or it's not 538, it's 50. I mean, I know, again, this is very petty, but even the title's stupid, even in the context of the dumb idea it purports. So, yeah. Uh, the second article was claiming the coming purge if Trump loses, alleging that it opened with the DNC media gleefully called the election for Joe Biden 4 days after Election Day, yet no votes have been certified, and the Electoral College vote is still over a month away.
That's
I
true.
would note at that point that Fox News had also called the
Yeah,
election. Um,
yeah.
so
It would seem pretty
but
obvious.
the DNC media gleefully, it then like alleges based on those statements from Bernie staffers that they like talked about re-education that the Democrats are going to do a purge. And then, as evidence that that was nefarious, the fourth paragraph was one sentence and literally said, like, when you Google the word purge, the top results are all about the purges in
Oh
the
my
Soviet
God.
Union and under the Nazis. Like, it was amateurish in even its
Does that
propagandizing.
guy know that Google searches are at least slightly skewed to whatever your search history is.
I didn't even. Yeah, but I mean, even that aside, it's not evidence,
Like
right?
he didn't get any like ads for the movie The Purge or any of
Like
the other amazing incredible remakes and sequels.
the but like even the like ah, then that's evidence that that's the kind of purge the Democrats want to do. Like that's
Sure.
just
Yeah.
stupid. That's word association. I mean, that's like that's just okay, but it's dumb. And so that brings us to this particular article, which was posted to Reddit, which is the New York Times covers for dead voters. Um, this was ancillarily related to a Breitbart article that was tweeted by Rudolph Giuliani, lawyer of President Donald J. Trump, uh, uh, which claimed that 21,000 dead people voted in Pennsylvania, but I will get to that in a moment because this article is much more fascinating. So, when Breitbart released that article, and it was then broadcast loudly by Rudy Giuliani,
Hmm.
uh, many outfits jumped on fact checking it because
There was a lot of work to do there.
there was a lot of work to do.
Uh huh. Yeah.
And so it was fact checked by PolitiFact. It was fact checked by the New York Times. It may have also been fact checked by WAPO. Yeah, lots and lots and lots of places fact checked it because, duh.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Facts.
Also, you will find that most of those fact checks followed very similar outlines because when something's false and you say why it's not true, that's probably going to be similar at every place saying it's not true and why, right? Because
One
we're
would
talking
think.
about facts.
Right.
So this American Thinker article, uh, and I mean the term article is doing a lot of work there. So's Thinker, uh, but um, alleged that the New York Times and these other outlets were covering for the Pennsylvania election fraud and the 21,000 because so many outfits jumped on fact checking it so quickly and they were all similar. It was an American Thinker statement evidence of coordination in
Oh
some way
God. Oh,
and
just.
thus proof that the claim was true.
Uh,
They even closed the article with a Winston Churchill quote: "A lie gets halfway around the world before the truth can get its pants on." As proof that the fact checking that happened so quickly by so many people that was similar was proof of the veracity of Breitbart's claims.
and how easy they were to disprove because it took everyone literally minutes.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, these things were published very quickly.
Yeah, I
Um,
imagine.
because it is easy to disprove. The claim is entirely spurious. Breitbart claims that 21,000 dead people voted, uh, and claimed, or implied at least, that they voted for Biden, and that was certainly the context in which Giuliani was parroting it, right?
Do they know all these dead people that got resurrected? Do we have like some kind of like crazy democratic necromancers going around and resurrecting dead people from graveyards so they could
I
go
mean,
and
if we did, maybe we could have taken the Senate. Um, but it'd be the right. Okay.
it just
But
seems so like
this also ignores that at the time that this occurred and the data they were using, you couldn't have possibly known who these individuals who supposedly were dead and supposedly, like, even if there were 21,000 votes made in the name of dead people and you could somehow know that when the votes were still being counted, you wouldn't know who they voted for.
right.
So,
Yeah. Like you
right, like, you just wouldn't.
and
The
they've been able to get some of these names, right? Totally these people that voted, these dead people, they got lists, they got their names, they got
there were I think there were a couple, but like, and that gets into okay. So first off, the claim was from the Public Interest Legal Foundation, which is a private group. It
okay.
was based on claiming that 21,206 registered voters were deceased, but the suit did not even allege that anyone voted in the name of these deceased people. So this was
But
just like the Judicial Watch study, and it was about dead people on the voter rolls.
so it doesn't say the thing that they're saying it says.
No, it doesn't at all say the thing they were saying it says. And there was already a case filed based on this. It was based on data from 2016 and 2018, not 2020, and the case didn't find Pennsylvania at fault because they found that they were keeping up with their voter rolls because they could only find 21,000 dead people on the rolls. And that's not actually that many on the scale of a state the size of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, how many people did Pennsylvania have in it that voted?
Uh,
Their voter turnout was
lot.
very good in Pennsylvania. It was
Um,
71.6%.
the Pennsylvania voter turnout counted thus far is
Oh, right, they're still
like
counting.
6.7 million.
6.7 million.
Yeah, and
Wow.
again, this was based on a suit that didn't allege that the people vote, and again, it was just about roll maintenance. That's all it was.
Again, not claiming that the people voted, but there's the insinuation that's going around that these dead people on the rolls were voting.
Now, this was actually spurred along a little bit. This claim was spurred along by a separate claim that these two claims were often reported together, though
Hmm.
not in the American Thinker.
Okay.
Um, to their credit,
Ugh.
ugh.
Yeah.
But they were often reported together in other places. I should have noted this, but hey, first podcast.
Yeah.
Um, where there's some reporting that becomes available where you can see if people have been ticked off the list as having voted yet.
Okay.
And in Pennsylvania, there are a bunch of people who are ticked off the list as having voted, and they all are surely dead because at this point they would be 120 years old.
But they
Now
were
their
ticked off
birth
as
date,
having voted. They were checked.
having voted, their birth date showed all of them too as January 1st, 1900. Now, Michael, you use computers a
Uh,
lot. What does that date have? Yeah, that date, January 1st, 1900, come to mind for anything?
yeah, it does. I seem to remember about 20 years ago we were really worried that.
It'd break everything? Yeah. And
Oh,
in fact, it
Carl.
still remains the default date if you don't enter a date in a lot of software. And what the reason these people are showing up, all of them with the same birth date, which somehow gives evidence that they voted and are dead, is because their birth dates were entered improperly or scanned improperly off the ballot, or like, right, it's just a clerical error, and then the database just defaults to its default date, which is January 1st, 1900.
My God, Carl. No, no. You are. That cannot be. That's way too logical. All signs are pointing to that this is Y2K coming back.
Yeah,
This is
yeah.
what we were so
Oh,
worried about
and
20 years ago.
let's note that once again, what they're alleging is that despite the fact that voter rolls have to be maintained, and Pennsylvania, which, as we just said, has been through several lawsuits, like with the Public Interest Legal Foundation, where they've had shown that they're keeping up with their voter rolls and had previously had to litigate through this in 2016 and 2018, somehow managed to miss that there were people that have been registered to vote who were born 120 years ago. So somehow they've managed to stay on the rolls, and the people managing to commit a vote fraud on the scale of currently 50,000, roughly, were not smart enough to check the birth dates of the people they were voting for.
Seems like a pretty incompetent scam.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yep. So that's
Hmm.
uh, that one. And this last one I think is really fascinating, and it gets even more specific, and it sort of speaks to some of the level of like it's pretty on par with a number of other like supposed whistleblower reports we've seen, like the registered sex offender who couldn't have even been legally living in Pennsylvania that showed up at Rudy Giuliani's press conference at Four Seasons Landscaping.
Oh God, I forgot. Oh, that made me laugh so hard
Um,
this week.
yeah, uh, and like or like the one Pennsylvania case where they alleged that they were being kept out but they alleged that based on a guy who was kept out because he was late until his credentials were fixed, and then he was let in before the court case took place. And while they had to acknowledge that they had other observers, it was just this one guy who was delayed because he was late.
Wait, so they actually had other observers in there observing? Just
Yeah, he wasn't their only observer. Both
man.
both parties get an equal number of observers, and the Republican Party has already had to admit in court that they had their observers, which actually included this guy by the end of the day. He just wasn't allowed in because he was late.
I,
But that's not
huh.
even the whistleblower complaint I'm about to talk about, which is
Okay.
even dumber. All
That's
right.
all right. I'm ready. I'm
This was
strapped in.
reported. The one where I found it was on a place called Newsfeed, spelled NUSFEED. Uh,
Okay.
a
Okay.
site notably not even checked by Media Bias Fact Check or All Sides, the conservative bias checker, um, which was created in response to Media Bias Fact Check because it was labeling places like Breitbart as far right.
Oh,
Um,
that doesn't seem right.
but so this was about a whistleblower in Nevada.
Okay.
Um, News feed though, okay, top article was Nancy Pelosi refuses to condemn socialism. The third line in the article quoted Nancy Pelosi as saying socialism is not the view of the Democratic Party.
No, because of course it's not.
Because it's not,
They've
right?
never.
Like,
Yeah.
she doesn't need to condemn socialism.
No.
That's stupid. Okay, but that's the kind of shit that's on Newsfeed. But
Oh
this was
boy.
about a whistleblower in Nevada. The article stems from a claim from a whistleblower. They have pictures of an affidavit. It's reported in multiple places. I am not saying that this affidavit isn't real, and I will not. And it's supposedly it's a sworn statement, so I'm not even willing to say that the person who gave this affidavit doesn't believe what they're saying.
Okay.
But it's a series of allegations that are honestly just silly. Um, so this is from an individual poll worker in Nevada.
Okay.
He alleges that they had multiple people coming in to vote who were not registered
Okay. So
to
they
vote.
couldn't vote then.
Yes, because they're not registered to vote.
Right. They
But
wouldn't
the poll captains were going to these people and letting them know that they how to register to vote, and that they could make an appointment with the DMV to register to vote, and that if they could show documented evidence of this appointment, that they would be allowed to vote by casting a provisional ballot.
have. Okay.
Yeah. And the guy even says that some of these people didn't even have their DMV appointments until January, but the poll workers still let them cast provisional ballots.
Okay. All right.
Yep. Now, I hear in your voice some hesitancy as to what this could be getting at, right?
Right.
Because I feel the same. Like, that they didn't let them vote. They cast provisional ballots. And those ballots in Nevada won't count if they're not registered. And it is absolutely not the place of the
Ah,
poll worker to determine if a person's provisional ballot should or should not count. That's a different group of people that are in charge of that.
that are doing the
So,
counting. The poll
yeah,
worker.
yeah.
Okay.
And they just won't count these if the people aren't registered to vote. But Nevada has laws that let them, like, if they could register that month, it is possible that their provisional ballots could count in Nevada legally
Hmm.
if they become registered to vote within a certain amount of time. Honestly, I kind of stopped looking. I couldn't find anything that said that was wrong, and it seemed to be legal, and there's infrastructure for that to be legal in a lot of states. But I didn't really feel the need to dive much into it because even in the whistleblower complaint, it states that these were provisional ballots.
Wow.
And provisional ballots won't count if the person casting them isn't registered. So I just didn't really feel the need to look further.
I
Um,
yeah. Yeah, that's a whole lot of nothing. That was
yeah,
I was
that's
thinking, oh, for a second, okay, well, they're letting some of these people vote. Now, obviously, if that's happening on a mass scale at every voting place in Nevada, and they're having people coming in, like maybe that would be enough to. Because Nevada, the
in the
margins there weren't
whistleblower
crazy.
complaint. He did say actually the margin in Nevada is up to 40, almost 40,000.
Okay, well, 40,000 people, like the population of my town times two, all voting illegally.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And he did allege in his complaint that this was quote happening all over the valley, but it would be because that's what you're supposed to do. The people get to cast a provisional ballot. I see no reason to look at this because there's no reason to believe it's nefarious. And even if the poll workers aren't doing it correctly, he says they were provisional, so they wouldn't be counted by the counters.
Okay. End of story.
Like, yeah, it's not a thing.
Hmm.
He also alleges that for a day, because he volunteered for a long time, and kudos to him.
Yeah, but it's
Um,
good. Get involved in the civic process, right? Get involved in
and
elections.
again, I am not making a statement as to whether or not this person believes the things that they're saying are worthy of whistleblowing, merely trying to research his claims. Um, but another claim he made was that there was always, outside of this polling place he was working at, there was always a Biden Harris table or a van or a tent. I got the feeling from the complaint that it would vary from day to day,
Hmm.
and that they'd be giving out memorabilia and refreshments, even playing music, right?
Okay.
Um,
Voter
so
intimidation is what you're telling me.
that was not his allegation. His
Oh,
allegation was that it was about the electioneering
it sounds
and campaigning.
menacing to me.
He specifically described it as encouraging, and he specifically described it as celebratory in his complaint. So it would be tough
Hmm.
for me to take this as a voter intimidation thing,
What kind of music
but
were they playing?
that was not given.
Okay.
Um, but here's the thing, and I looked this up. I stopped to do some research in Nevada under statute. Nevada revised statute 293.361 establishes a 100-foot perimeter around
Ooh.
voting places. Now, personally, I think it should be. I think it should be bigger.
100
But
feet is
that's
not that much.
no, that's not. Because he did say it was in the parking lot, but there's a lot of parking lots that are bigger than 100 feet.
Yeah. Walmart.
Uh,
I've been to
yeah,
Walmart.
every Walmart, every
Hmm.
strip mall, right? Um, and he even goes on to say in his complaint that the complaint even states that the team leader of the polling place had to repeatedly remind them that they needed to stay 100 feet away.
Them being the Biden people.
Them being the Biden Harris people, yes. So, even within this complaint where he says that they were there, he is saying that the rule that they needed to stay 100 feet away was being enforced, even
Okay.
if perhaps some individuals were getting too close, right? So
Dangerous.
they
Intimidating.
shouldn't have been. And I personally believe that the legal distance should be quite a bit farther.
Sure.
Um,
Or maybe
but
just
it's
not allowed
not.
to do that shit on election day. I'm fine with that too.
I don't know if they were doing it on election day. This was during early voting, was primarily
Oh,
what his
okay.
complaint. He said it
Okay.
started in October.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, but still, not illegal, um, and not even nefarious in the complaint. And the complaint specifically says that the 100-foot rule was being enforced.
Wow.
He also claims further. This is the final claim that he made, and perhaps the most interesting, that during a lunch break he took in late October, he quote personally witnessed two people handing multiple unopened mail in ballots to two other people who then opened them and filled them out against the side of the Biden Harris van. He claimed
Hmm.
further that, quote, the same two people who marked the ballots put the marked ballots in the official pink and white envelopes. These individuals were not poll workers. He claimed even further that when after he observed these people fill out the initial ballots, that a bunch of people milling about formed a human wall that moved with him to block his view of what was happening.
Okay. All
Um,
right. So they're playing a game of Red Rover, basically, all staring him down, forming a human wall to prevent him from seeing.
no, because they were gathered around the people at the van, so they would not have been facing towards him based on his description.
Oh, they wanted to see how these guys voted.
I guess. Um, he claims further that because he's a poll worker, he just knows these were ballots because he knows what ballots look like.
Hmm.
So I find this claim spurious and unprovable, and not necessarily nefarious at all. It is not illegal, from what I could tell, in the state of Nevada to help someone with their ballot. So they could have been helping people with their ballots. They could have been their ballots. And this person was taking his break from being a poll worker, and he clearly wasn't, he was not close enough not to be blocked by a crowd. So we have no idea how far he was from these people filling out paperwork. How do we know they were even ballots? How do we know they weren't their ballots? Like, this is a this is an odd claim that to me is uncompelling. Even if they were ballots, if two people are filling out the same ballots, those signatures are going to be messed up when signature matching takes place.
Sure.
Um, and like, he just, all he can say is that he saw the initial two things that he thought were ballots being filled out before a crowd got in his way, who then he attributes them to having intentionally blocked him. But like, I don't know, man. I don't know how to even define that. That's, I mean, I know what I'm picturing, and it's something out of Looney Tunes with like people shuffling in front of somebody. But like, I don't know. It's just, it's an odd claim to me, and it's basically meaningless.
Yeah, I can't. And again, even if that was all true, like this is like nefarious. We're using that word a lot tonight, but I really enjoy it. Gang of democratic socialists that are all coming in to cast secret votes. Uh, it would have had to be a really large group over multiple counties to even make up a
More than forty
fraction of
thousand.
what the vote difference is
Yeah,
between Biden and Trump. Like it's not it's
yeah.
the scale of it. Like even that small group of people, there's no way they could have done more than even a couple hundred each would
Honestly,
be
I wouldn't
insane.
think
Like
I would. Yeah, per precinct, maybe a few dozen
yeah,
before someone noticed.
it would be nothing.
Yeah,
Statistically, it would be irrelevant.
the scale makes it meaningless because he couldn't individually have observed anything meaningful. The fact that he was far away makes it meaningless because he can't know for sure they were ballots. Even if they were ballots, they could have been their ballots. Even if they weren't their ballots, it's not illegal to help people with ballots. And if they were fraudulent ballots that they were getting ready to turn a whole bunch in, then
Mm,
that would be caught by other protective measures in the state of Nevada. Um,
exactly.
and if they weren't, it wouldn't be meaningful.
No.
And then he finally finishes with another claim that over the course of the month he worked there, he saw multiple people bringing in multiple ballots. It's legal to bring in your family members' ballots for them in Nevada. He probably did see multiple people bringing in multiple ballots.
Yeah.
It's legal. There's nothing
and
wrong with it.
and there are assistants that there's a legal way for you to, like, some volunteers will go to nursing homes because it is difficult for people in these places sometimes to get out and make it to a polling place. And it's especially unsafe for them to do so right now. A lot of nursing homes are on lockdown, especially with coronavirus cases surging. So having somebody that goes and helps you fill out your ballot is not illegal, but as long
Nevada
as they're following
Statute
the rules and
293.353. It is legal for someone to return your ballot, a family member or designated caregiver to return your ballot.
right. But if they help you fill it out, they also have to sign the ballot
I didn't bother. That didn't seem relevant to the.
to
I don't know if
this.
that's true in Nevada.
I guess that's true in my state. I don't know if that's true in every
It's
state.
true in many states. It may also be true in Nevada. It was not relevant to me to his claim that he saw multiple people bringing in two ballots.
Yeah,
That
that's
was it
right.
was a small scale too, because it just is legal to bring in a family member's ballot.
Right.
And like, why would you both go?
Right. Yeah, it's there doesn't seem to be anything really nefarious behind that at all. We're gonna have
Nope.
to find another word. Hold on, I'm gonna check a thesaurus.
Eh.
This is Carl. I am. There's a lot less to these than I thought. Are we just not hitting on the big conspiracy theory? Like they have to have something better than this.
I mean, I've been trying to keep up with them. Maybe we'll be able to do it again. I mean, some of the other big ones are so there's the dead voters claim keeps cropping up a lot. Um,
Common.
the they kept our poll watchers out crops out a lot, but
Yeah.
it's just not true. There's one where they claim that like they wouldn't let the poll watchers nearby but that's because there's a pandemic, so there was a 10-foot distance enforced, and then they reduced it to 6 feet. Like that
Hmm.
was there was a social distancing going on.
Right.
There's one where they claim that in Pennsylvania again that the windows were blocked on the polling place um, when a bunch of protesters showed up to tell them to stop counting votes.
These were
Uh,
protesters, all of some of whom were also armed, correct?
I don't know if they were armed in this specific instance, though there have been armed protesters. Yes,
Though I would like to
but
say I would be very happy with the windows blocked while I was trying to count votes in a place
yeah,
like
I mean
that.
they're out there, they're banging on the windows, they're screaming. There's no way they couldn't hear them through the windows, so they put up the blocks and they claim that's nefarious. But throughout the state of Pennsylvania, the vote counting was actually streamed live
Ugh.
on camera.
So
So
even more, we've had even more, what's the word I'm looking for? Even more
transparency.
transparency in
Yeah.
this process than we've ever had before.
So yeah, they blocked the windows from the shitheads telling them to stop counting votes
Man,
because they
legit,
were
that would
probably
be that would be
intimidating these volunteers working 24 hours a day to make democracy work. Uh,
Christ. And imagine those poor people in there. Like, that would be terrifying
oh
to have
God, yeah.
somebody, to have a mob outside your polling place where you're trying to do your work and count ballots and people slamming on the windows and yelling at you outside. I would be freaked.
Oh God, yeah. So yeah, so they blocked the windows, and yes, the people in the lobby couldn't see. I guess unless they pulled out their cell phones and looked at the camera feeds.
Hmm. Well, we've all seen Ocean 11, Carl. We all know how fallible camera feeds can be.
Yeah, I've played Watch Dogs. So that's an allegation, and then so they're all just like, at least the ones I've seen are just based around like either just blatantly untrue nonsense. There's been two or three thrown out just because they couldn't provide any evidence. Weird assertions about counts being off, claiming you didn't have representation when you did, claiming your people were kept away from the vote counting when they were kept to the 10 feet limit agreed upon before this all started.
And to make this clear, these aren't just allegations that are get thrown around. These are actual lawsuits that the Trump administration has filed
Many are, yes,
in
not
these
all.
states. Okay. Like they're actually trying to take this to court to get legal traction in this. Like
The claim that they were kept away and prevented from observing the vote counting because they were being kept at the 10-foot limit established in advance for poll watchers. Um, I mean, I think because of the coronavirus, uh, did go to court. It was they settled, I guess, by agreeing to a 6 foot margin for the rest of the count. But the court case was brought with the intent of stopping the count.
right. Right. Stop the count is a actual Trump tweet from yeah, all
Yeah.
capital
Uh,
letters. Uh,
the one where they claimed that their watchers were not allowed inside was actually litigated, and that was resulting from the gentleman who was late, and so they checked his credentials before letting him in, but he was let in, and their other poll watchers were already there. Um,
wow.
the
So pretty weak sauce.
Yeah, the 21,000 dead people. I don't know if that. I don't think that was litigated this year. It was litigated already though.
There
Um,
was a, I remember, and this is just another allegation that was thrown out there. This is a viral video that was out there. I don't know if you saw this, but this video of a bag full of purportedly Trump ballots that gets lit on fire. Um, this guy with disembodied hands, pulling out these ballots and showing that they're all marked for Trump, and then they're put in a bag and lit on fire, and the bag burns, and that's one thing that I've seen going around, people using that as proof that there's
oh yeah, I have
vote
seen that
destruction.
bandied about a lot.
Yeah, but if you look at the ballots, you can tell that they're just printouts. Like this is not, it doesn't in any way look like a legitimate ballot. And that's what the fact checkers have found. That of course you just
Yeah,
look at
there's no
that video and it's
provenance
like,
to
yeah,
that video whatsoever.
somebody printed out a bunch of ballots, fake ballots, put Trump's name on them and lit them on fire. It means absolutely nothing.
Yeah, I think there was another one. that yeah, they're all just stupid though. That's the
I
thing.
yeah. Um.
Like,
So
oh,
I.
there was one. It was a pixelated video of two people at a desk. It's from one of the cameras that they have watching the count,
Hmm.
and one person is picking up ballots and then setting them aside, and the
Eating
person
them.
sitting
They're
next to
eating them.
them. No, no one's no eating ballots this time.
Oh, damn
But the
it.
other person is sitting there filling out ballots, and then they seal it up and set it to the side. And the person reads them another one. They fill it out and set it to the side. This was taken as evidence that they were changing votes, but these two people were just assigned the task of something that gets done every election in Pennsylvania, at least, which is if there's something about the ballot where it's clear what they meant to do, but it's been damaged in shipping or something, they fill out a replacement ballot.
Oh, so like if you were filled your ballot out in like crayon or something like that, they're like you can't.
Yeah, or if it gets like fucked up in the mail.
Okay, all right. I don't
Yeah,
imagine how that would have happened. It's not
yeah.
like the president put in a
Well,
guy to run
but
the
I mean,
post office that tried to completely have it dismantle all its high-speed sorting machines. Uh,
long established process though, because stuff gets damaged in shipping or people do dumb things, and like it's a documented process. Both sets of ballots are saved. It's documented what they moved over, but they claim it's evidence of fraud because this person who's filling out the ballots isn't even stopping to look at other ballots. But there's a person sitting there with him reading them to him.
right. It's wow. Yeah, it seems that what dang it. I just had this. Odious. Seems
Odious,
odious.
yes.
Very odious. I found that thesaurus, by the way.
Nice.
Yeah.
uh,
So we have, I don't know. We probably should like 15 minutes left in this. We've nowhere near touched on every aspect
no,
of all the
but we are
conspiracy theories that are
already
going out there.
12 minutes over our planned target time.
Yeah, I want to talk for just a second about if there is no proof of this, right? Or no good proof of this, and certainly no proof that would indicate that on a widespread scale that this fraud is being committed to steal this election away from Donald Trump. What do you think might be the motivation for making these claims? If he is going to get kicked out in a couple months, like why would
So
he fight so hard for this?
obviously, nothing in very few things boil down to just one motivation. Um, at this point, I think the overwhelmingly likely thing is that our system prevails and he is no longer president on January 20th. I do believe that that is overwhelmingly likely. The election seems to have taken place at the sorts of margins that make this sort of fuckery not really viable. Where even if he could get votes thrown out, even if he is successful in some of these court cases, something that we've touched upon multiple times is the margins are such that it is unlikely to flip states, and he has to flip a lot of states. Like even if he does flip Georgia, Georgia's not even called yet, and Biden's already at 290. He needs 21 electoral votes to get this to a tie, even without Georgia, and that's going to be tens to hundreds of thousands of votes that he needs to get eliminated, and that's very difficult to do in a targeted fashion, even when you are intentionally going about it in bad faith, because you're having to throw out so many that the arguments you use are also going to throw out your own votes. It's just
So if it's that unlikely that they're going to be successful with getting this overturned in any sort of heinous way, like what's the motivation? Do these people have
so
jobs after this administration's over? I
if
mean,
we accept that they legitimately believe they can still steal the election, the remaining ways would be the most probable way would be faithless electors. But again, 21 or 36 is what they would need, and that seems incredibly unlikely. And the political capital, I don't know. I hope not. I hope that's not likely.
God, I hope not.
We've got Bill Barr, who has turned the Justice Department loose on uh, going after the election in a utterly and completely unprecedented thing, where historically the Justice Department will not get involved until after the election is certified because, you know, it works for the president.
Yeah.
Well, it works for us, but it reports to the president. Well, it's
Right.
supposed to work for us.
Yeah.
Um,
Not so much of that going on these past.
yeah, you have Mike Pompeo stating that there will be a smooth transition if Trump wins, and then giving like a half-ass statement to make it like that was a joke. But like, at minimum, read the fucking room, man. But
Yeah. I'm glad he at least walked that back as a joke, but
kind of. It was a shitty ass walk back though. So I mean, they still could steal it, but it'd be blatantly and clearly non-democratic. Um, so I think there are a couple motivations left. One, and it's the most hilarious, that the subtext on donations to his fighting the election campaign say that those donations can be used to pay off campaign debts. Um,
that was the
so
one that I was
the
most
grift.
interested in.
Um,
Yeah. So
I think there's more though.
can we talk about that a little bit? Because I think that there's a lot of likelihood in that scenario.
I
I
think that's at least a substantial motivator, yes. I
Yeah.
think the others basically come down to he's a cruel narcissist who likes having an audience and he'll get to yell about it. And he wants to keep the division up, to keep the chaos up,
Hmm.
to potentially prevent consequences from falling upon his head. I don't think that would work.
No.
Um, but like, he's a crazy man and an idiot. So he thinks he's amazing. He thinks he's fucking Superman. So like he could think it would work. Um, and then also I mean like Trump TV, right? Like I could absolutely see him. I mean, we thought back in 2016 that he might have been laying the groundwork for a media company. He'd
Yeah.
talk to people and producers and staff like that's what he was doing. Um, and he could probably make a shitload of money doing that. So I think that part of this might also be that. But yeah, I think the big motivator is the campaign debt.
Yeah. Which right now, the campaign debt that they've publicly announced is 1.22 million,
Ha.
which is not honestly that much compared to what they spent. I
That can't include all of like the security fees and stuff. Like I know he still hasn't paid El Paso,
Oh
and that
no.
alone was hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Right. And
There's no way he only has 6 unpaid bills.
no, that there's just no way. And the amount of obfuscating that they've done with their campaign finances, I kind of went down a rabbit hole while we were doing our research on this and looked at where the Trump campaign was spending its money, and this is probably, I mean, certainly it's a discussion for another time because we've gone an hour and 47 minutes into this. But their main vendor, right? This is a the vendor that has got the most amount of money funneled to them, 378 payments totaling $331 million, um, is made to a company called American Made Media Consultants. And this is by far and away, by a factor of 30, over the next highest vendor that was paid by the Trump campaign. An American-made consultants, looking into them, just a quick D&B search on their filing for the business, shows that they have only 2 employees. So typically, when you see something like that, a company of that scale getting paid that much money by a campaign with that few employees, that tells
That's
you that
Brad Parscale's company?
uh, it was set up by Brad Parscale's associates. But get this,
uh,
Carl. He's also big on that list of vendors. There are a couple very notable uh, very notable vendors
that's
on
way
this
bigger than
list.
his salary, though.
It's way bigger than his salary. The total, all told, on salaries, they spent the campaign spent $21.5 million on salaries.
Well,
Um,
but yeah, but I mean, if they spent $343 million to pay American-made media consultants, which is Brad Parscale's company, founded to handle Trump campaign stuff,
mhm.
plus his salary, and that company only has 2 employees, then I would say that 21 million doesn't include another 343.
And Carl, let's not forget the other two vendors that were on this list. It's a little bit further down, but 6.6 million is to Parscale Strategy, and another $4 million to Parscale Digital.
What the fuck?
Uh huh. So
How? I'm like, I know he's now been indicted for campaign finance fraud, making him the third Trump campaign head to
yeah,
be indicted for crimes directly related to their
an
campaign.
eighth
Uh,
person directly associated with the president that has been convicted of crime. Well, he's not convicted yet, but it doesn't look
uh,
good.
also, clearly now we know after he found out about it, he went crazy and holed himself up in an armed standoff with police.
What? I didn't
Uh,
hear this.
yeah, yeah, down in Florida.
What?
Yeah,
Oh
in his
shit.
mansion.
Well, I mean, he has millions of dollars, so that could be one hell of a standoff.
Yeah, yep, yep,
He
yep.
might actually be able to buy ammunition with that kind of money.
And it happened right at the time when he would have found out he was going to be indicted. And then we
Jesus.
found out he was being indicted like a week after that.
What happened? Did he get taken in?
There's a great video of him being smashed to the ground online
Oh my god, I have to go watch this.
by the cops. Yeah.
Wow.
But I mean, like, he's a white guy, so of course he's alive.
Well, of course. Yeah. But slamming to the ground, though, a little police brutality on, wow, on a millionaire. That's not something you see very much.
Yeah, well, I mean, to be fair on that, millionaires also don't regularly get in armed standoffs.
Yeah. And not that I would condone police violence towards anybody, a
No.
millionaire, much less anyone else. But
No, but a man who apparently we now know stole from and ran the campaign of a man who explicitly advocates police brutality. I mean, even though I don't like the brutality, there certainly is some Schadenfreude going on there when
yeah,
he gets smashed to the ground.
yeah. I'm gonna go watch this as soon as we're done here. Well, I guess to wrap this up, we've talked about a little bit. I mean, there's so much to go into with stuff like this, but we've researched a little bit into kind of the modern history of election fraud, the our current
Allegations.
allegations, yes, and some documented
Yeah, yeah,
instances of voter fraud, our current soon to be not presidents. Uh, Allegations of fraud, how common they are, and going all the way back to 2012, uh, as well as the allegations that he is retweeting probably as we speak, and then just how fucking unlikely it is that anyone would be able to pull off a scam of this magnitude, much
yeah.
less the Democratic fucking party.
Which I would also like to note is not to say that it is impossible to steal an election or alter the course of an election or propagandize an election. Just that this particular method of stealing an election by altering votes is essentially impossible.
It's so inefficient as to require such incredible resources and for everyone to keep their goddamn mouth shut who's
Yeah.
involved in this process, which would literally need to be hundreds of thousands of people. Like it
Oh,
just
it's a scale that would make the moon landing conspiracy look like a tiny group of people needing to keep their mouths shut. Plus, the people you'd need to be involved, like there's no possible way you could vet the people. The low level at which you'd need people to be involved, like
yeah. It's
yeah.
it's 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 difficult to overcome numbers like it's difficult to comprehend numbers like this. It's extremely difficult to put together a fraud of this scale and be successful with it without having any sort of leaks whatsoever. It
Yeah.
just it's preposterous. I haven't seen,
Yeah.
and until they come up with any sort of evidence, I will continue to be. Uh, I can't believe I'm ever going to be siding with the mainstream media, but I will continue to be proud of people who do not give airtime to unfounded allegations of voter fraud because it's doing actual damage to not only the integrity of our election system and the faith in the actual American experiment itself, but it could cause some very real actual violence,
Oh, absolutely.
which is my
Yeah.
fear. It, it it seems more and more likely the more and more this rhetoric gets stirred up, and the more Trump continues to promote these things, I wonder just how unhinged he's going to get.
Yeah, it could get really bad. I mean, it promotes violence in the immediate term, and as you mentioned, even if we get through this without violence, it destroys faith in the process in a way that is almost impossible to restore because it's raising concerns about problems that aren't problems
Right.
and problems that can't be problems. So they're also problems that can't be addressed. So if someone says they're really concerned about X vulnerability and you can't fix that vulnerability because it's already not a vulnerability and they won't believe you that it's not a vulnerability and there do not exist effective protections against such a vulnerability because such a vulnerability doesn't exist, you can never fix the lost faith in the
Right.
process.
You can't. Yeah, you're trying to solve a problem that hasn't been a problem to begin with.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, yeah, if someone wanted you to fix the automatic shifter in their manual car because they were convinced it wasn't working, it's
Wow.
like, I, I
Yeah.
can't. So
Yeah.
you're refusing to fix my car? I guess.
Yeah, I'm gonna refuse to fix it because it's not broken, buddy.
Yeah. It's
Boy.
got this extra pedal.
Well, I guess that's one bright spot of this is that it does show that our system is not as broken as it could be, and it's not so weak that a very, very blatantly aspiring authoritarian, as we decided to call him early on this episode, can't just easily take over
Yeah.
and cede power to himself. Um, the checks and balances are working. The system's being stressed, arguably harder than it's ever been stressed before. And here we are still
Yeah.
voting, and still getting double A marks on our voter election integrity from international observers. So even outside of our own country, people are going, "Yeah, guys are doing a
Oh,
good job." Kind of weird that you guys are
conversation.
having this conversation.
Yeah. I mean, conversation for another day, but as I said last night, bureaucracy probably saved us.
God. Well, I guess cheers to cheers to bureaucracy then.
To bureaucracy.
Ugh. Well, buddy, this has been fun. I'm glad we had a chance to do this, and
It has. I look forward to doing another.
yeah, me too. I look forward to getting more time to even doing even more research into more of these topics, and maybe we'll come back to this again. I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll see what
Yeah.
happens in the next
It's
month or so.
it's fertile ground.
Yeah, changing every
But yeah.
day.
Yeah. So this is, I guess, our first podcast.
Pod has been casted, sir.
Yeah. And yeah, no, lots of fun.
Yeah,
So
lots of thoughts.
thank you.
Final thoughts, Carl?
No, just maybe if someone does listen to this and someone does listen all the way through to the end of this, thanks. And
Thank
if
you.
you have any questions, do your research.
Do your research. Do your research, and I want to quote the great Jerry Springer, and say, take care of each other.
Very good.
Cheers to that, buddy.
Cheers to that.